Welcome to this latest episode of the C-Suite podcast that we're producing in partnership with Payable and their Pay It Forward podcast. This series shines the spotlight on the ever-changing world of payments with insights from merchants and leading industry experts. In this episode, we're asking a big question. What is the future of resale? Is the high street finished or just reinventing itself again? As more of us shop, work and live online, what happens to the physical spaces we used to rely on? We'll explore how changing payment technologies from open banking and digital wallets to local systems like Wero are shaping the customer experience and how both brands and consumers are adapting. I'm your host, Graham Barret, and joining me to share their insights are Pedro Bennasar, Head of Payments at Vestiaire Collective, Kate Nightingale, Chief Behavioural Officer and founder of Humanising brands, and Chris Skinner, CEO of the Finanser. Welcome to you all. And looking forward to the conversation. Chris, let's start with you. You've written very recently, actually, about the decline and the resilience of the high street. What does the future of retail look like to you?
We're in challenging times, obviously, in that an awful lot of physical goods you can now order directly online, as we all know. And an awful lot of the traditional stores have been closing down or going bankrupt. But the main street and or the high street, depending on where you live, is still there. It's just changing and becoming very different. It's very much a leisure street rather than a retail street. And as a leisure place, it's very much geared around food, drink, networking, company, and as part of that, experiential. So we've had to move from stores that are trying to distribute goods to stores that actually present goods that you then buy through apps or other services afterwards. And the one thing for me that's the key is when you deal with everything digitally, if there's no physical connectivity, there's a problem. If you can't complain to somebody, there's an issue. And maybe I can illustrate it very quickly by the fact that my children, who are 9 years old, play Roblox all the time, and there's no connection to someone sort out issues because they just lost their account. You know, what you need is some form of human connection at some point to present the future. And the main street will provide that connection, and it always has, and it probably always will, just in a very different form.
Absolutely. Kate, coming to you, I saw a quote on your social media. Retail stores are not four walls anymore, but people's meaningful moments. How do you see retail spaces changing?
I'm really glad you actually picked out this quote. So this is very much my approach, where it is very much more about the connection that we have with brands and their kind of experiences and everything that the brand means. But in places where that brand comes to us, and in situations and occasions where the brands just appear precisely when it's relevant to us when we need it. So that's kind of my idea of meaningful moments. It might be that, there's a vending machine just when you're walking into a train station and it's exactly what you needed in that moment. It could be that somehow perfectly when you climbing a mountain, there is a little bit of a pop-up from, let's say North Face, which one of the things that they have done, because you, I don't know, ripped your jacket or something, on a way. And it's this kind of, like when exactly you feel like you need it, it's there. And, and think about it. It's like human relationships. And this is exactly how our brain actually perceives brands. It perceives them as human beings. Both psychological and neuroscientific studies show us that. And it therefore also builds human relationships the same way as we want the important people, the friends, family, romantic relationships to just be there exactly in a moment when we need them and piss off when, when we don't need them, when we need to be by ourselves. This is exactly the same expectations that we have towards the brands. And, if we always have to be the one to go to a brand, and tell the brand what we want, then this is not a relationship. You see what I mean? we kind of do expect to almost be read in our minds. That's why it's this kind of appearing in the right moments. And that means that when you look at the retail portfolio of the brands, it is changing massively. Yes, there is absolutely a space for a standard high street part of the store, the transport sections of the stores or little pop-ups, the full-blown flagship or brand museums. But there's also a space for bonkers experiential moments, or just, having a little bit of a special surprise thing that arrives through your doors exactly when you're having a bad day. Those are all interactions with the brand that have a full-blown physical and, more importantly, multisensory element, which we can do to a degree online, but we won't be able, because what it's missing, and it's missing intimacy. And intimacy is predominantly physical. So it's that real kind of aspect of making sure you understand what are those moments, what are those relationships, what are those situations, occasions where you want to appear in people's lives, because then these are the moments that they will associate with your brand. So every single time they're faced with that moment, it lights up the idea of your brand in their head, and you're going to the top of mind position, which is exactly what you want. And that's where it's, why it's so important strategically. But more importantly, another thing that it does, it is it changes power dynamic between a customer and a brand. It used to be the brands dictating what we do, how we do it, where we go to meet them. This has been gone for 20 years, and the brand's just catching up with it. Some of the better ones earlier, but this is what we want, and we don't even know we want it, most of the customers, but this is exactly, how we want. We want those things just to randomly be there exactly when we feel like we want them or need them, or haven't even realized that there will be perfect augmentation of our moment. You see what I mean? That kind of beautiful change.
Bonkers experiential moments. That's my favorite quote of the podcast so far. Pedro, from Vestiaire's point of view, how are new payment technologies, I'm thinking of things like open banking, digital wallets, buy now, pay later, or even local systems like Wero, how are they all changing the retail landscape?
Sure. So we, as a predominantly e-commerce or re-commerce, as they now call marketplaces, mainly dedicated to support sustainability. What we definitely are seeing in the payments ecosystem is that, generally speaking, traditional payments are actually becoming more and more cannibalized by new players in the ecosystem. One of them that you basically mentioned for sure is buy now, pay laters. And recently I read a report where basically we're saying that buy now, pay later solutions now represent 7% of the checkout. Um, all the checkouts globally in the e-commerce, and they are growing more and more. In our case, for instance, buy now, pay laters solutions are important because they make the products that are available through our marketplace available to everybody. And as a pre-loved fashion marketplace, and as as um, a marketplace who really, I mean, one of our main pillars and values is to bring sustainability and secondhand products in the ecosystem. So kind of, just rethink more about fashion. The fact that we make those products available to everybody and not just to the wealthy ones really makes a difference for us. So having such solutions, which by the way also are being driven by the consumers who are more and more interested into that really makes the cliff for us. But also we are noticing also the shift from the typical card usage to actually wallets. I mean, one of the topics that you were mentioning was the latest technology that actually has been launched in Europe, which is called Wero through the API. And also, and what we are seeing is that, of course, we don't have it yet implemented in our checkout because it's just available in 3 markets and only peer to peer right now. But what we are seeing is traction, and when you talk to different consumers, you are seeing actually like the value of actually bringing these kind of solutions that are already, for instance, existing in some European markets, such as, for instance, in Spain, Italy, or for instance in Portugal. Um, and generally speaking, if I were to look a little bit into high street and retails, also there are some other reports that basically are kind of justifying a little bit what the statement that I'm just bringing here, which basically what is it's being seen as this cash payments are being reduced more and more and more. For instance, I mean, if we compare it to what used to happen in 2026, what we've seen is like 40% of the cash payments have been dropped and have been moved to something more digital, such as the wallets such as Apple Pay or the likes of that, or even like the usage of cards. And also what we are seeing is that big players such as PayPal or Klarna are kind of shifting not just to be a digital and an e-commerce payment, but also to be an in-store payment, and basically are bridging the gap between just being pure an e-commerce and being an offline payment, and therefore they're becoming an omni-channel solutions. And I think PayPal has just launched very recently. I think it's in Germany. They're going live now with an in-store payment. So basically, you're going to be able to use your PayPal wallet in a store as well. So there are a lot of changes that are being driven by the consumers, who are basically pushing for the technology to become part of the payments, and then the payment partners are evolving thanks to this need that is coming directly from the consumers.
Yeah, absolutely. And that ties in with what Kate was saying about this as being consumer driven, brands needing to be where the customer is, all those kind of ideas. Let me get all of your thoughts on this question. What defines a great customer experience from a payments point of view? Pedro, do you want to start with that?
I mean, top mind could be like a seamless notion of that you are paying for something, right? That's basically you want something and all of the sudden it's being paid. Now that can create a little bit of controversy because, of course, like the consumer needs to know what they are paying for. But but what I would say is just to actually remove as much friction from the whole um, acquisition process, meaning that as soon as the consumer has selected an item, to basically have as little steps as needed to actually make sure that this order goes through without any kind of barriers in between, I would say. And the payment partners and also, for instance, the e-commerce and re-commerce ecosystem are moving towards that direction, and just putting technology in place to actually make sure that the users convert as much as possible and generate less friction, and potentially which can lead to contacts, so as much as possible.
Kate, you're shaking your head there. Please, what would you like to say?
So my favorite answer to absolutely every question is it depends, because it always depends. There is no silver bullet solution. Now, everyone kind of talks about frictionless. I'm going to break that whole thinking. I have this concept of meaningless friction and meaningful friction. Now, friction is necessary for brain to even register that something is happening. When there's no friction of any kind, it's a non-happening to the brain. You won't even pay attention that something is happening. There won't be a memory of that, and it will not add value to your experience. But that's why we have meaningless friction and a meaningful friction. Meaningless friction is those things that annoy you, that piss you off, the extra step, the things that are loading up too slow and whatever else. Oh my goodness, how many more questions do you want me to answer so I can get that 10% discount? But again, it depends. The extra step could be a form of meaningful friction, which is things that add value, but they still require more cognitive and emotional effort or investment of some sort. They require time, they require you to make another choice or anything like that, but they add value to your overall experience, to your overall satisfaction. They're create a better journey. Now, so adding another step, for example, at a checkout, or even two, or adding a question is something that actually is extremely useful for individuals with certain neurodiverse conditions like ADHD, because they actually suffer from a considerable impulsivity and often spend money that they should not be spending, that they do not have. So actually research, including some of the ones that my student as her master dissertation did last year, show that if you do add another step, or if you do add another question to, for example, a checkout process, it allows them to actually step back from the impulsivity and ask themselves those questions. Do I really need it? Do I really want it? Is it right for me? And everything else. And that actually improves an overall satisfaction, reduces impulsivity, increases the actual real conversion, reduces the return rate of those products, and improves the overall relationship, because they're certainly not going to blame themselves, and feel guilty and whatever else for what they bought. They're going to blame the brand because they haven't made it right. Now, with all the other customers, although neurodiversity is estimated to take over about 22% of the population, whereas if you ask Gen Zs, more than 50% of them, define themselves as neurodiverse. So you're dealing with a crazy amount of population that no one is designing for properly, let's face it. And it doesn't matter whether it's physical or whether it's online. Now, but even if you're not neurodiverse, let's say, okay, so you were talking about a more sustainable and re-commerce and things like that. Adding another step, like, would you like to round up your transaction, and which charity would you like us to give the money to? That is an example of a meaningful friction. It still requires more time, more cognitive effort from you, but it does add to the experience because it represents the values of that business, which were the things in the first place that attracted you to that business, because you felt that it's psychologically and emotionally relevant to you. And that was the reason why you bought it. So if you add that, you actually reinforcing the importance of those values for your brand. So no, frictionless, not right. Removing the meaningless friction, those things that annoy us, yes, but making sure you understand what are the meaningful friction elements, those things that can add value. And yes, that can mean that the process is longer, different, more difficult. But then we also have so many other modes of payment, like even going back to the old-fashioned exchange, you know? You've got a bag of potatoes, I've got the pair of shoes. Thank you very much. We actually starting to come back to it. Yes, supported by, different technological platforms, but that's only going to be growing, you know? So let's not shut ourselves into typical monetary form. Let's think how how kind of we can enable an exchange of services and goods in some kind of system that still assigns a relative value to it, right? Because that is coming, it's not going to go anywhere. We're not going to be able to keep earning money because the inflation is going to go off the roof, right? So we can't just keep printing it. So it's just impossible. So we need to think beyond those boxes and actually come back to some of the old-fashioned solutions that have always worked, and that is also an example then of a meaningful friction, because I need to grow that potatoes to earn that shoes, but go ahead, do it, it's your skills, it's your ability. But that's also part of, how we can kind of make that more sustainable ecosystem, and not just payments, but everything, But anyway, I could keep going on about this stuff forever.
Sounds great. Chris, should we go back to some of these old-fashioned solutions? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, no, I think it all comes down to ease, simplicity, and convenience. And during the pandemic, many people picked up on the idea of using mobile wallets. And now I would say that mobile wallets are becoming the battleground for the next few years. And we know who the winners are likely to be, because many of us use an iPhone, for example. And now Apple is very much focused on digital identity, which will build on that to make ease, simplicity, and convenience of payments, omnipresent and everywhere. Having said that, going back to meaningful friction, as Kate pointed out, if you're making a $10,000 transaction, it's very different to a $10 transaction. And so at that point, you need more balances and checks. And the challenge is, how many balances and checks do you need? And how easy is it to provide those? I think at the moment we have a myriad of different barriers we have to jump through and hoops we have to leap through to get to those payments, which in many ways, as a consumer experience, you understand because you don't want to lose your money. But by the same token, sometimes those balances and checks are applied to $10 transactions, which is ridiculous. So we have to get somewhere between those. And equally, the core of all of this is trust. And where I'm coming from right now is, how do I prove that I am me and you are you in a deep fake world? And I think this is where the rubber hits the road right now, which is there's an awful lot of issues around digital transactions. And the retail transaction in the physical world is an obvious case where you can do that with trust. In a digital world, it's much harder. There's so many scams, hacks, rip-offs, and I think I've already mentioned, my Roblox issue right now. So, what we need to do is to sort out the mess of digital. And the core of this is that the internet was designed for the transfer of information, not for the transfer of money. And we're trying to overlay on that original structure of the internet the transfer of money, value, and identity, and build a new generation of structure which was not designed in the first place. And I think we're failing miserably.
That's an interesting take, because I guess the genie is out of the bottle now. But what the implication for what you're saying could be is that this could actually drive people back to the high street. If there are too many deep fakes and this situation gets progressively worse, we might think, well, the only way I know I can be secure and safe with my money is by visiting a high street store.
Well, I'm not saying that. I think the bottom line is that we can deal face to face in a way in which we can build trust. Although you can get scammed and hacked in face to face transactions too. But we've exacerbated it and amplified it and made it much, much easier. And so, I see so many examples of people being scammed right now by celebrities, by illustration, who are not actually endorsing cryptocurrencies or whatever the scam is, but because you see this name and this person is saying this is a good deal, you invest in it, and it can be thousands of dollars, and you lose all that money. So many romance scams. So, I guess where I'm coming from is that we need, and this is the bit that's really missing today, a strong digital identity at the core of the network where I can know that you are you and I am me.
If your business relies on e-commerce, there's one part of your site that can make or break a sale, the checkout. And it turns out what consumers want at checkout might surprise you. We're talking frictionless flows, localized payment preferences, and even a surprising number of shoppers choosing security over speed. Payable has just released its European checkouts report, a deep dive into what shoppers across Europe really expect from their payment experience, both online and in store. Whether you're battling cart abandonment or exploring new payment methods, this report is your ultimate guide to optimizing conversions in 2025. Download it now at payable.com/state-European-checkouts and get the insights you need to turn browsers into buyers.
Pedro, you were kind enough to take us through some of the different payment methods that you're introducing or you have introduced. What about from a generational point of view? You said that consumers are driving these new payment methods. Is it the younger generation in particular?
Yes, so what we are seeing is that definitely younger generations are kind of more driving the change.
As you'd expect, yeah.
Yes, and are more willing to leverage the technology that's available today than, for instance, older generations, where in some cases, like even just paying by card, which is it's just kind of today is the bread and butter, it's just becoming challenging, especially because of the different security measures that are put in place today, such as the 3DS, that's sometimes it's just become very challenging for older generations. So yeah, so I would say that usually like younger generations are driving the change because they want something quicker. They want something which basically whenever they want to buy something, it just doesn't generate that much extra layers of complexity or double checking that that for instance back in the days might happen. Um, and to your point, Kate, that you were mentioning about the frictionless, I I echo the fact that it's not that everything needs to be like purchase. I purchase it, in the sense of like, um, of course there needs to be checks that needs to be done. So for instance, like if you kind of are regulated, it needs to be in compliance with the regulations. Like if if you are a super heavy spender, then maybe your bank needs to run the different checks. But I think, like, to my point, what I was trying to say is that whenever you have somebody who's interested into a purchase, as long as you know there is no regulations or no complexity into there, I think the pace to this purchase should be made as easy as possible, because ultimately, like, as a private company, I think everybody's interested into monetizing the investment that they are doing in their technology, in everything they are putting into place. So that's a little bit where I'm coming from. Now, to the point that you were mentioning about this social also thought, and also what Chris was bringing, the trust into the ecosystem, that makes sense. But to make those 2 points, I think there is already technology available in the ecosystem today, especially for the trust, where as an e-commerce you can already track down the good and the bad guys. Now it depends on the company how much they want to invest into it, I guess. So to become more and less strict to that. And to the social point that you were making, Kate, I think it's good, but I think also the technology should be leveraged to actually provide kind of these different levels of experience at the checkout, when the kind of the technology can detect this potential behavior and this potential risk of having these higher spenders, who eventually what you are encouraging is that the health problem that they have is just become bigger, bigger, bigger. And that can also be a good driver for the e-commerce to kind of invest in that, because the more the the society becomes aware of these problems, and the more they invest on that, like, I think as a consumer, like, that could potentially bring also benefits to it.
Yeah, because that's the thing. I'm like, what you're also discussing, you can't forget that a lot of those solutions are part of typical accessibility regulations, and there's going to be coming much more sort of an augmentation of a lot of those regulations to include neurodiversity and everything like that. And I agree with you that yes, in most, not in all, in most of the cases, an ease of checkout is something that helps an experience. But again, it is very much dependent on the brand, on what you are selling, on a price level, and lots of other things. That's why I always say it depends. Because yes, an annoying checkout is part of the meaningless friction, right? But again, let's say engraving or some other form of personalization on a luxury product, which is also part of the checkout, that's a meaningful friction, right? So again, there is no black and white solution. There is no silver bullet. Where things should be easy and pleasant, there should be easy and pleasant. But where you believe you can add value, especially what is related and what is representative of your brand personality, your brand values, your mission, your purpose, and everything else, those are the moments where you're adding it, even in such a process as a checkout. And things like, impulsivity isn't only an issue for neurodiverse individuals. It is also an issue for a lot of customers, especially those younger customers that haven't yet fully formed their identity. And that leads, unfortunately, to a lot of returns, which, as we know, are heavily costly for all of the brands. So it is also very much of a financial thing to think about how we can implement some of those kind of behavioral solutions that can actually make the purchase more certain, more satisfied, so that those return rates are reduced. And at the moment, majority of the places do not have that because they either have a lot of meaningless friction on a checkout, or if they do have some small bits and pieces added, like which delivery provider would you like? Because I, for example, don't like certain couriers, so I wouldn't choose them ever, then fine, that those are good things. But nothing beyond that, you see what I mean? And it's, we need to kind of make sure that we don't just go, oh yeah, everyone should do things like that. No, it doesn't work like that. It is very much dependent on your brand, on your customer, on your market, on your product, on your price level, on your promise, purpose, and 500 other conditions that you should be thinking. Because then, if you think like this, we're finally going to end in a world where we actually have a freaking brand differentiation and not every brand looking exactly the same and offering us exactly the same thing. And we barely so forget about loyalty, forget about actual amazing experience as human beings that we can have. We're just going to have all the sea of sameness, which is exactly what we're having. And those brands that don't, do that because everyone else does it, those are the brands that we keep following and we keep navigating towards because they are bonkers. They are bold. They believe, what they believe, and they do not care what anyone else does, and they do their own stuff. And that is what, what adds value for us as customers. Even if we have a little bit of a meaningless friction and we get pissed off, we forgive those brands faster because of a relationship that we have. So let's not try to kind of find a box which we can all use because that's not going to work ever. Ever. And I also don't want to live in a world where everything is the same.
Absolutely not. No. Well, let's bring this conversation full circle. Let's wrap up this conversation, which has been fascinating. And I'd love to get your thoughts on we've been talking about the future of retail throughout this conversation, but if you all had to predict one major shift in retail payments or the retail experience over the next 5 years, what would you say? Chris?
Well, I think the whole movement towards biometric payment is inevitable. We're not far away today with Face ID and Touch ID, but it's going to become far more pervasive, particularly from what I've seen in China, where I spend a lot of time writing and researching, and the fact that these days I can just pay with a smile if I'm going in and out of a store. And I think that whole Amazon store experience, which is now in the UK and coming across Europe, where you can walk through a store, load a basket, and walk out without anyone actually serving you or doing anything, is going to become far more a reality. You're not going to buy carrots on the internet necessarily, although you can do because you can get them delivered by the grocery store. But if you want to go and inspect the freshness of the carrot or whatever goods you're buying, you'll go into a retail store, but you'll literally walk in and walk out and pay with a smile.
Sounds attractive. Pedro, what are your thoughts?
I think the artificial intelligence definitely it's gonna land in payments. And that, to your point, Katie, I think that that definitely could be potentially a game changer for the ones who wants to invest on that in the whole experience. And of course, like it's I think it's gonna be evolving. So right now it's very much evolving in the customer service support through the chatbots and all stuff. But definitely it's a start being picked by the first movers into the payments ecosystem, and I believe there is a strong potential there. Now, risk to that is security, and faking identities, which can lead to a major blow up in losses for the ecosystem. So I think it's a technology to be watched out, but with a little bit of sensitiveness to also the potential downsides that this can bring into the ecosystem.
Kate, the final word to you.
So for me, it's going to be a very careful blend between analog as seamlessly supported by tech. Now, what I mean by that, people are actually navigating back into analog physical experiences and removing digital from those experiences. And that is actually most prevalent across Gen Z and Gen Alpha. They are still doing things on the digital channels and they still want those digital channels to work for them, but they do not want them to disturb their analog, physical, multisensory experiences and connection with human beings. So we're starting to see less of let's take a picture everywhere where we go to a physical experience, but we still want that kind of level of digital support so that I can subtly, seamlessly pay somewhere, whatever else, or check how I get there. But but that's suddenly these devices that we have, not to mention that we're going to have more devices that actually augment our reality as well, right? Which we're already starting to see, but we're going to have more and more of that throughout our life, and much more human style of an interaction. So another thing that we are seeing, especially around AI, and if you look into research around kids, so the Gen Alpha and an AI, they perceive them even more as human. The more they know about AI, the higher their AI literacy. Um, and then they also kind of actually expect them to behave like human, including things like, having a normal conversation, ideally using a voice, and they're imbued them, and basically they anthropomorphize them. So they're imbued them with emotions and, and thinking and personality and everything like that. So that much more human style of interactivity with tech is going to happen. And those things are already happening. It's just people are not yet as bold. Only some visionaries are to actually do it that way. But the studies are there. The trajectory of that change in people's brain is there. The actual normal tendency for people to anthropomorphize technology is there, especially as fueled by the rising loneliness. So all of those things are going to happen. So the tech, yes, there, but the tech that behaves like a human, that gets away from my experience and doesn't disturb it, but appears when I need it, and then moves away again. So I can have a real, almost analog like, with a subtle, infrastructure support from the tech. That's what's going to happen.
You've given us a lot of food for thought, so thank you all for joining the conversation today. I love that analog kind of digital relationship that you're talking about there, Kate. But yeah, thank you very much to Kate, thank you to Chris, and thank you to Pedro. And please do follow this Pay It Forward series wherever you get your podcasts. You can catch up with all the previous episodes at payable.com/podcasts and also on our C-Suite podcast website. And if you want to contribute to the discussion, you can find the C-Suite podcast on LinkedIn and all the usual social channels. Finally, if you'd like to get in touch with the show, you can do that via the contact form at csuitepodcast.com. But for now, from me, Graham Barrett, thank you for listening and goodbye.